what's the deal with gluten? Why is it so controversial? It clearly is part of the modern media landscape, but it also results in a lot of distress, both nutritionally and politically. I'm not only talking about standard medicine versus alternative therapies, even though that's part of it. I'm referring to the severe and widespread damage of undiagnosed gluten sensitivity versus the psychological reluctance to give up what we consider one of the most emotionally attractive and satisfying foods of all time. Gluten-containing foods like cookies and breads stimulate the addiction areas of the brain, raising brain dopamine levels that promote carbohydrate-seeking behavior, binging, and food habits that are not consistent with human health. I don't think I've ever witnessed a more passive-aggressive food option. Unfortunately, the political correctness of being gluten-free discourages any kind of rational discussion about our bagels or beer. Let's face it, if you aren't gluten-free, you aren't hip. You might as well watch TV or let your son play with a plastic sword or declaw your cat. I'll get further into the science of gluten in a minute, along with how you find out whether it's an issue with you personally. But first, let's look into the past and see how all this came about. Until the 1800s, wheat was usually mixed with other grains or beans and nuts. In fact, wheat flour has only been milled into refined white flour during the last 200 years. And it wasn't until the 1950s that celiac disease, the severe intestinal disease, was found to be an autoimmune disorder caused by gluten. That discovery saved millions of people from malnutrition, neurological damage, cancer, stunted growth, and even death. Unfortunately, until the present, medicine has looked at the wheat sensitivity issue as either black or white. Either you have it and you can't eat any gluten whatsoever, or you don't, and breakfast donuts look like a fun, nutritious option. Most doctors tell people that gluten sensitivity is in their head if they don't have a positive blood test and a positive intestinal biopsy. They think that people on a gluten-free diet are just following the latest fad, or as one doctor put it, these people are trying to find a physical explanation for their emotional problems. But are they wrong? Well, to answer that question, we'll have to review a little biochemistry. Now, grains are made up of carbohydrates, phytonutrients, and proteins. When a person reacts to gluten, it's those proteins that cause the problem. The gluten portion contains 5 different proteins that are stretchy and sticky, causing the dough to rise. When wheat is eaten, enzymes in the GI tract called tissue transglutaminases break it down, and in the process, other proteins are formed, like deanimated gliadin and gliadorphins. Here's the thing. When someone has celiac disease, the autoimmune disorder, they have an immune response to one protein, or alpha-gliadin, associated with one enzyme. But people react to all the other protein components I listed, along with other enzymes that directly affect the skin and brain. This is a big problem because in conventional testing, and the one many of you have received, only one protein is tested, and you'll be told that you are not gluten sensitive regardless of how severe your wheat reaction. There are shades of gluten sensitivity that are now called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, a very common condition affecting 1 in 20. This is a particular special kind of allergy called a non-IgE food allergy. Now, we didn't evolve to eat gluten. In fact, humans had no gluten in their diet for millions of years before wheat cultivation. Because of this, we don't have the digestive enzymes to break down glutamine and proline in gluten. This image is a depiction of the gluten protein. I've highlighted the different parts that can cause different reactions in different people. The upper green area makes chemicals that send neutrophils, or white blood cells, to the area that set the stage for inflammation. And the blue section communicates with bacterial cells to make zonulin that causes leaky gut, leading to even more inflammation. And the worst, the red segment here at the bottom left, can actually cause cell death. Your body reacts to gluten as if it was infected, and your immune system deals with it, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. But this fight against invaders and foreign compounds happens all day long. But making a diagnosis of gluten sensitivity is difficult. In fact, half the people with gluten sensitivities don't have any intestinal symptoms at all. They'll have problems in the areas distant from the GI tract, like the brain, stomach, skin, liver, endocrine system, blood vessels, and smooth muscles. That's why gluten is related to a vast variety of diseases, including diabetes, dermatitis, Hashimoto's disease of the thyroid, neuropathy, and even schizophrenia. Some unlucky people have enzymes that break down gluteomorphin and dynorphin into opioids like heroin and morphine. That's right, your body can make addictive drugs out of gluten. So you can imagine getting these people off of gluten is going to be very difficult because of gluten's addictive properties. In the most severe gluten reaction, problems can develop in the white matter of the brain, causing degeneration and calcification. Here's a scan of a 44-year-old man with a progressive 5-year history of spastic paralysis and inability to walk. The lighter shade of gray at the top section indicates brain degeneration and calcification. A scan 2 months later in section B shows even more extensive changes in the white matter of the brain. Finally, after 7 months of tests, he was started on a gluten-free diet, and in the bottom section C, you can see how the white matter is beginning to clear, and this went along with his resolution of symptoms. Many people nowadays are noticing how gluten seems to be causing more and more problems. And they're asking the question, is gluten stronger than in the past? Well, the answer is yes. The amount of gluten in wheat has increased enormously from hybridization and may further increase due to the GMO process. Sometimes it's just not that great that science can give people what they want versus what is healthy. This is why apples are sweeter, bigger, prettier, and have 1/3 of the nutritional value they had in the 1800s. Also, there's the issue of the altered structure of the gluten gliadin proteins. The glia alpha 9 sequence, for example, that is associated with triggering the changes of celiac disease, has been enriched in modern wheat, though nearly absent from the wheat of 1960 and earlier. There have also been some changes in the structure of the wheat germ agglutinin, the indigestible protein of wheat that exerts direct toxic effects on the small intestine and may also block leptin, a hormone that makes you feel full, and so you want to eat more and more of it. And then there's the issue of hybridization. Wheat in Greek Roman times had a total of 50,000 genes, but through hybrid breeding, wheat in the Middle Ages increased to 100,000 genes. These gene embellishments increase the yield of production. For the sake of comparison, a grape has about 30,000 genes and humans only have 20,000 genes. By the time of the Renaissance, 400 years ago, wheat had 150,000 genes. All these factors contribute to the fact that gluten tolerance is 400% greater today than 50 years ago. Older forms of wheat, such as spelt and amaranth, don't contain the high levels of gluten that modern hybrids do. That's why European breads don't seem to have as strong an effect as American. Sourdough breads made properly with longer periods of fermentation are less problematic. So how do we find out where we as individuals stand with gluten? One way is to test the HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 genes. A positive result suggests the celiac diagnosis, but it only tests for celiac disease, not gluten sensitivity, the problem that you might have. Another way is to go gluten-free for 2 months and then add it back in. If gluten symptoms improve and then worsen when gluten is reintroduced, you are very likely gluten sensitive. However, sometimes this isn't enough because of the problem of cross-reactive foods, or foods that are so similar to gluten biochemically that you will react as if you had gluten sensitivity. Corn, oats, and rice are very similar in this way to gluten and cross-react along with eggs and, unfortunately, coffee. Not only that, 50% of the people with gluten sensitivity are intolerant to casein, the protein in milk. But the most sensitive test is by a lab called Cyrex that can measure all 12 epitopes or proteins and enzymes including proteins in the wheat germ that can cause gluten sensitivity. As you can see from this Cyrex test, this is a woman that didn't react to alpha-gliadin or to transglutaminase 2, and unfortunately would have been told by her doctor that she wasn't sensitive to gluten. She did, however, test positive to gluteomorphin and prodynorphin that can cause a morphine-type reaction and transglutaminase 3, which is expressed in skin that can cause dermatitis. She also was positive to transglutaminase 6, an enzyme expressed in the brain that can result in neurological problems. Unfortunately, this kind of misdiagnosis can happen all the time. So what do we do if we know we're gluten sensitive? First, it's important to realize that sensitivities are much worse when inflammation is rampant, like the case of gut problems from good and bad bacteria imbalance or the presence of other autoimmune problems. A workup from a professional knowledgeable in this area can determine if this is the right direction for you to go. But at some point, if you have tested positive with any of the above tests, it's time to get off gluten. It's best to be gluten-free for about 2 months, and then you can try to reintroduce gluten products back into the diet ever so slowly. Let's make one thing clear, however. Gluten is not an essential nutrient. That being said, when you take gluten out of your diet, something else has to go back in the diet, like vegetables and fruits. And I have one last thought. There's a lot of bad food options out there, from French fries to, in this case, pasta. But with the knowledge that you have now and the testing that we have at our fingertips, we can be more certain than ever that the path we take towards health will actually make us healthy. If you're interested in additional information about natural ways to solve your gluten issues, please visit our site and make sure that you're getting all our updates and new videos as they come online. If you'd like to work with me personally, you can let me know there too, so that we can get that set up as soon as possible. Help is on the way.